In this video, I will teach you the most important things I have learned about chess. So this video will help you become a better chess player. So I will be playing against a 2300 rated opponent, and I will teach you the most important things that you need to know to become a stronger player. So first of all, I need to quickly talk about openings. The biggest mistake that so many players make, especially beginner players and newer players, is that they obsess over chess openings. And I used to do it as well. When I was starting out chess the first couple of years, all I was doing was I was watching opening videos, I was memorizing opening lines, I was looking for opening traps, and it really is one of the worst ways to start off as a chess player, because those types of things make you feel like you are improving, make you feel like you are learning something. But in reality, you are not really doing that much. And when your opponent plays something that you are not prepared for, you will just not know what to do because you still haven't really learned how to play good chess. So that is very important. What I now do instead of focusing on openings, is I try to keep the opening extremely simple. I put my pawn in the center, I protect it with a different pawn, I try to develop some of my pieces, and then I try to castle. This seems extremely simple. This is like the basic advice that they give to every single beginner. But when I switched from memorizing openings to following opening principles, meaning following this advice, that's when I was able to reach 2000 rating and even higher. So this is very important. Here I will teach you one very important thing that I do every single game. When your opponent has a piece on your side of the chessboard, you need to get rid of it. Your side of the chessboard is this. It's the first four ranks. And they have a piece here, this bishop. We need to get rid of it. So I am going to play pawn to h6. And this is very important because if you let their pieces stay inside of your position, as soon as they get 2 or 3 pieces there, that's just a problem, and you are going to be running into tactics. So here we have an exchange. It is important that you don't do the very silly beginner move, which is to play pawns to h6 before they have a piece there. No, that's not the strategy. Our opponent can put a piece there if they want, and then we play the pawn to h6. All right, and they play queen to c2. This is going to be one of the most important moments because probably you have never been thinking about this before, but I will try to change the way that you look at the chessboard. What just happened here? What just happened? They took a knight with a bishop. And I'm pretty sure that like 90% of people watching this think, yeah, like what's up with that? It's just an equal trade. No, that's not an equal trade. They gave us a bishop in exchange for a knight. They gave us a dark squared bishop in exchange for a knight, and that actually matters. And this is how you need to think during the middle game. You need to base your middle game strategy on two things. One is the imbalance in the minor pieces, or in simple words, the difference in the minor pieces. Minor pieces are knights and bishops. Or the second thing is the pawn structure, which I will talk about in a moment. So the minor pieces, what just happened? We now have a position where we have two bishops and a knight, and they have two knights and a bishop. Okay, well, that means that since we have the two bishops, our main goal should be to open up the position. And with opening up the position, I mean that there cannot be any pawns here in the center of the board. Imagine if all of those pawns were gone, then bishops would be incredibly strong because they have very good diagonals. They would be attacking, for example, here, straight into the enemy position. This one would finally be able to move, or maybe it could go here and also attack that way. When you have knights, which is also possible, right? My opponent has knights. The goal is to keep as many pawns in the center as possible, because then you are blocking in your opponent's bishop. So that is the first thing that we need to talk about. So which move can we play that removes pawns? And we want to remove pawns from the center, but we also want to remove pawns if there are any pawns here. That's the small center, and the big center as the blue one. The small center as the red one. So which move can I play that removes pawns from the center? Well, it's pretty simple now that you know it. The move is take. They take back. Two pawns are already gone, so that's good for us. You might think, well, we just helped them, right? We helped them to develop a bishop. That is true. But it actually doesn't matter because that bishop is not doing anything. We still have these two pawns here blocking in the enemy bishop. Now the question is, how can we remove more pawns from the center? Well, we would need to play either e5 or we would need to play c5. So what would be a very good move? Where could we put a piece so that it attacks those two squares? Okay, knight to d7. That is a move. And they castle. Now, which move can we play to remove pawns from the center? c5. And if they take, or if they don't take, it doesn't matter. Because again, I can always do the same thing, and you need to do this in your games as well, but don't take the time to draw and color in all the squares. It's just going to take too much time. Which move can we play that removes pawns from the center? Well, it's pretty simple. Pawn takes d4. If you just follow this strategy, you are going to have such an easy time in your chess games. So we already did a bunch of things right for our pieces. Now it is time for me to teach you about pawn structure. There are many different types of pawn structures. On YouTube, I even have an entire pawn structure guide. You can also go to pegasuschess.com, where I have a free chess course platform. You can also learn about pawn structures there. But I will teach you the basics here. The most important thing that you need to know about pawn structures is the idea of pawn islands. That's the basics. What is a pawn island? This is a pawn island, a red pawn island here. These pawns are connected to each other. Let's imagine that this was on h5. That would still be a pawn island, those connected. Because even though they are not directly connected, we could connect them by playing pawn to g6. And with connect, I mean protect each other, basically, or at least stand next to each other. So we have one red pawn island, which is a four-pawn island. We have four pawns. And then we have a two-pawn island here, which is my blue pawn island. My opponent has the same. My opponent's red pawn island here is only three pawns, but look at this. They have something which we don't have. They have this one in the middle of the board. I will color this in orange. This one is all by itself. So my opponent has three islands. I have two. And the player with the least amount of pawn islands will be better placed in case an endgame starts. Because in the endgame, that orange pawn will always be by itself. They will always need to use pieces to protect it, so we can attack, and they will need to protect it, and we might be able to win that pawn in an endgame. And also here, we could just try to win it as well. So that's very important. So they have an isolated pawn, this one, the orange one, and it's also an extra pawn island. When your opponent has an isolated pawn, what you need to do is you need to control the square in front of the pawn as much as possible. Because if I don't do anything and they can just push it and they can just trade without any drawbacks, that would be bad for us. For example, I will just play any random move. We always need to look, can they potentially trade? And here, well, they could trade, they could get a bishop to the center, and now it's back to equal. They have the 3 on here, we have the 3 there, and then we have the 2 versus 2. So that would be the most terrible thing that could happen to us, because now we just lost one of our advantages. And this is very high level, but this is how strong chess players think. They don't think about, let me attack the king, let me try a checkmate. No, we think about this. We think about pieces, we think about pawns. So where can we put a piece so that we attack this square? That's the question. Well, knight to b6. And now we have two pieces attacking that square. So this is really good because now that pawn is fixated. It cannot really move forward, which helps us with our strategy. Whenever your opponent makes a move, it's very important that you sit on your hands, meaning you don't immediately play a move. You should try to think, imagine if your opponent had another move, what would they play? And if you think like that, you would be able to find their strategy. So they are setting up an attack here. Does it matter? No. This is a battery, but the bishop is first. If they check, I can move the king. If these pieces were switched, that would be a problem. Then queen to h7 would be a checkmate. So we don't want that, but this is okay. So middle game strategy. What do we need to think about? Don't forget, we need to activate the bishops as much as possible. That is our advantage. And we need to make sure that they can never push the pawn. How can I get this bishop into the game? Well, I can play bishop d7. And they cannot push the pawn because if they pushed the pawn, I would have been able to take it. I had two pieces there, and they only had the knight. Okay, they play bishop here to e4, and again, what is this doing? This is attacking my pawn. Now, a very good question. Should we play the move bishop to c6? You should be able to answer this question. Should we play the move bishop to c6? What happens if we do this? Well, take, and look at this. Red pawn island, blue pawn island, and we have, I'm always looking for the orange color, an orange pawn island, and so do they. Now, both of us have 3 pawn islands. That's not what we wanted, right? We had an advantage in the pawn structure. Now we just messed everything up. So we don't want this. We do need to protect it. So we could play rook to b8, or we could play queen to c7. I think both of those would be good moves. I will go with rook to b8 because this protects it. And it also helps because my queen was potentially controlling that d5 square. Okay, and they play knight to e5 and they attack our bishop. So we have a very important decision to make here. Should we take that knight? Well, you could take it, but my answer is going to be no, I won't take it. Because if I take it, well, again, red pawn island. I will keep repeating it so you remember this forever. And yes, this is a pawn island for them because they can connect by playing f4. And then we have the blue pawn island. So first of all, the pawn island situation is equal again. Second thing is the bishops are equal again. The knights are equal again. So that would basically remove our advantage that we have here. Okay. But they are also attacking a bishop. So we need to do something with it. And in this position, there's actually not that much we can do. I could go back and play bishop to e8. I think bishop to e8 is probably the only thing that I can do to keep the bishop on the board. I could also just move my queen, which puts a threat of potentially taking that knight. It could lead to a trade. And then in this case of the trade, the material is back to equal. So what I will play is I will play bishop to e8. And I'm not necessarily saying that that is the single best move, the only thing you can do, but it is the move that really helps with learning this idea of trying to keep this advantage that we have. So bishop to e8. Okay. Well, of course, this is the most ugly position, right? We don't want to have a bishop on e8, and it's all because of this annoying knight. How can I potentially get rid of that knight? Well, I am going to play queen to c7, and with queen to c7, I attack the knight, and if they don't do anything, I would trade, and then potentially I could win a pawn there. Knight to g4 attacks the bishop. Do we want our bishop to be captured? No. So I will be moving the bishop so that we can keep our advantage. Okay, and they just go back with the knight to that square. Like, whatever, they can do it, it is fine. So, already, I hope you learned so much from this about the pieces and the pawns. Now it's time to add another layer to this, because of course there is much more that you can learn except just this. The next thing that we need to talk about is diagonals and files. So what is diagonal? These are diagonals. And what are files? These are files. So we need our bishops to be on open diagonals, diagonals with the minimal amount of pawns. So this dark squared bishop is doing quite amazing. The light squared bishop, yeah, it's okay. We might be able to find a better square for it in the future, but it is okay. We also need to think about our other pieces, for example, our rooks. And our rooks are best placed on open files, which are files that have no pawns, or semi-open files, files that have one pawn, and it's best if that pawn is an opponent's pawn. Because, for example, this file is also a semi-open one, you could say. We have only one pawn there, but yeah, it's our own pawn, so a rook would be blocked. So you would want to place a rook here or there. What is the best one? Well, obviously this one, because we also attack the knight, and that knight is attacked twice. And the knight was also pinned. If the knight moves, anywhere, I can actually show you that. If the knight moves anywhere, we take the queen, they take, and then we take with the rook. So they would just be losing a bishop there. So they cannot move. So we have a pin and we have control. And there are two very important things that you can do to control a file. One is that you put as many of your major pieces, your queens and rooks, on the file. The second one is that you try to control this square, the first square in the file from your opponent's side of the board. Because if you can control that square, and with that I mean attack that square, you can force them to move, and then, or to not be able to put a rook there, and then we might be able to infiltrate. So what move can we play that attacks this rook? What move can we play to attack this rook? Well, we have two options. We could play bishop a3, or we could play bishop to g5. The question is, which one is better? I like bishop g5 a bit more because I feel like the bishop is actually pretty well placed. And we have to, of course, watch out. Is f4 possible here? No. If f4 was possible, I would go there potentially. But I will go bishop to g5. Now you are starting to see what I talked about before, how we want to remove pawns from the center of the board. And it's because there are almost no pawns in the center of the board that now our bishops are so incredibly strong that we actually have a winning position here. We can take the rook, and that just wins us material. So you can see, if you follow this strategy, we are playing against the 2300. It's very easy. We were just able to get a winning position. The next thing that we need to talk about, we are up material. And when you are up material, there is a new priority. That priority is trading. So I will be playing knight to d7 because I am proposing my opponent to do a trade. If they take, that is fine. I get my bishop in the game. And if they don't take, for example, if they protect, I would just be capturing them. And then the question is, why do we want to trade? Well, imagine the queen, the rook, the knights, and the bishops being gone. All that's left would be a rook for us, a knight for them, and then the pawns. But since we have a rook and they have a knight, we will win the endgame. Because the rook can go up and down, left and right, attack everything, and the knight is very slow. So if I could exchange everything, I would have a winning endgame. My opponent is trying to, give me a headache. They play a knight to d5. And now we need to calculate, because I can take this. They can do a fork. That's annoying. We gotta move the king. We only have one square. And we also need to watch out that we don't run into anything there, any checkmates, but actually nothing works. And then the question is, what do they do? If they take that, we can take, which is fine. It's just a bunch of trades. If they take the rook, I would be taking that with check. So it looks to me like whatever happens here, as long as I take that queen, I am just exchanging. The only thing is that I need to move my king over there. Okay, and they just take with the bishop, which is also possible. It's probably better for them because they can avoid a trade. Our rook is still under attack, so we need to move it and make sure that we don't blunder the rook. I'm a bit sad that they moved the knight, because if they didn't, I would be trading. But it looks to me like this knight is actually in trouble. If we play knight to f6, it looks like we can attack it, and it doesn't really have anywhere it can go. So that's just another piece that I can grab for free. So we are now already up 5 points of material, but I mean, we still need to continue. And of course, when we are in this type of position with so much extra material, we don't really need to think about the pawn structure and the files and diagonals and the pieces that much. All we need to think about, as I have said before, is trading pieces. So why did I play knight d5? Because this is the quickest way for me to potentially get a rook trade. And my opponent is doing what you absolutely should not do when you are losing, and that is trading. Because every single time that they trade, they eliminate one of their pieces, which they could potentially use for counterplay. And now they will not have any counterplay. Okay. I think I actually see another beautiful move here we could potentially play. Knight c3, attack the bishop and also attack the pawn. They can win this, but we also win a pawn, which is a trade. It's a trade of pawn, but it is still a trade. So I think that looks fine. Or I could also give the check and take the central pawn. And I actually think that is going to be the better way to do it, because in general, the central pawns are more valuable than the pawns on the side of the board. Okay, but we still need to try to win this endgame. The funny thing was, actually, this also set up a trade. That would be a forced trade. So I think we can force the trade here. I think if I play f6, they move the knight. Look at this trade. Bishop c6. It's a check, and it's forced trade. So that is exactly what we wanted. Now all that's left for us to do is to try to trade those knights. And then if we trade those knights, we will just have an endgame where we have one extra rook. If I can trade pawns here, I'm also going to trade pawns, but it is important that you don't trade all pawns, because sometimes trading every single pawn is going to lead to a draw, and a draw, even in a position where you are up material. Not here. Here it's not a problem, but sometimes it can be a problem. So what move should you play? There's not really anything you should really do that's guaranteed here, but I'm just trying to improve the position. And now I will show you my most favorite move. My most favorite move, and I always get hate comments for this, but it is my favorite move. Rook e4. And you might think, like, why do you play rook e4? Rook e4 guarantees us a trade. It guarantees us a trade. Because we attack the knight, and if they move the king over, we have this, and that's a trade. And if they move the king over there, I will have to go to analysis mode. Yes, if they move the king over here, you know what I do in those types of positions? I take the knight. And you might think like, wait a minute, you are giving up a rook for a knight. Yes, I give up a rook for a knight. Because now this is an endgame where we have a piece, they don't have a piece. And this is incredibly simple to win. And if you keep their knight on the board, you might eventually end up getting forked and losing your rook. So that is what I would do. They went to a bad square, which basically allows me to just do it like this. And this should be a very easy position to convert. Convert means turning it into a win, because we have a rook and they don't. There are a couple of strategies you can use here. In general, in the endgame, it is way more important to start using a lot of pawns. And also it is important to bring your king closer to the center. So that is what I am thinking about, pushing pawns and bringing my king closer to the center. Okay. We also need to keep an eye on what's happening on that side of the board, but we will always be able to stop them. And now I can play the move which I wanted to play, which was pawn here. Because I'm trying to see what they are going to do. Are they going to put their king in a corner? Yes or no. And from here, there are many different ways how you can win the game. I will just show you an easy one, which is that we are going to try to win these pawns. We are going to win these pawns. It's impossible for them to hold on to the pawns. All right, we are going to win the pawns. And then you can make queen, or you can make an extra rook. And I will be making a queen, I think. Yes, they still have a square. We need to watch out for stalemate. We can make a queen. And that is going to be a very simple checkmate. Check with the queen. And then here we just have checkmate, checkmate, or queen a1, checkmate. So please try to use this in some of your games and let me know in the comments how it went.